Welcome to Keep What You Earn, your judgment and jargon-free zone for entrepreneurs of all levels. Get ready to learn how to scale your business, save money in taxes, and create a business that grows your wealth. If it feels like the financial side of business is like eating your vegetables, well, then think of this podcast as the ranch dressing to make the process a little more enjoyable. My name is Shannon Weinstein. I'm a CPA and business owner on a mission to simplify money and empower others through knowledge. I hope this episode inspires you to take action, but remember that the information we share is for educational purposes only and is not individual tax advice. Now that we got that out of the way, let's start the show. Hey, welcome back to the show. Today, I'm really excited to welcome another guest to the show, and her name is Jackie Koch. Now, Jackie is one of my business besties, but also the founder of People Principles. And she also has a long history in her career of serving as a recruiter for startups and tech companies. And what I love about Jackie's wisdom is that she always has a very practical way of explaining HR related stuff and helping us founders really hone in on the skills that we need to attract and retain top talent. She's been a great, voice in my ear over my past few years, advising me along the way. And I'm really excited to share with you this conversation I had with her around the question of whether we should be building or buying talent. Let's take a listen. Hey, Jackie, welcome back to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course, anytime. Now, Jackie's a repeat visitor for good reason, because honestly, the number one cost I always tell you guys for your business is your people, and especially if you hire the wrong ones. So the most expensive mistakes you can make are with hiring. I stand firm behind that opinion. And that's why I love having our guest, Jackie Koch, on the show. She is an HR expert, and she's dealt with so many different things with startups. And even just the fact that you come from California, Jackie, in your background, I'm just like, oh, she's got chops, right?
Thanks. Shops, got wound.
Yeah, wounds, scars, all the things. So, Jackie, welcome back to the show. So happy to have you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think leading HR in states like California and New York is a masterclass and a deep dive into all of it. So I think it's set me up to at least understand how complex and difficult things can really be, for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think when you can master a craft in the most difficult environment, like you can run on rough terrain, when you can run in bad weather, it's like, or even drive. I'm like, oh, then when everything's smooth, you're like, oh, this is actually isn't that bad. So I love that you have that background. Would you mind telling our listeners who maybe don't know you a little bit more about your background and your expertise?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for always having me back and for being such a great sounding board for me, too. I'm so grateful to have you in my business life to bounce things back and forth on. So I have over 15 years of experience in recruiting in HR. I spent the last 8 or 9 in high growth startups. I used to live in LA, as you mentioned, often as the first HR and people hire, and launched my own HR consulting and recruiting business about 5 years ago because I love early stage companies. And what I found is they definitely need strategic HR and recruiting help, but they don't need it full time. So they often wait too long. And I found myself cleaning up so many messes on aisle 7 when I was in house that I decided to launch my consulting business to try to help businesses avoid some of the big mistakes I had to clean up. And I think it's been very helpful for most of them. We, knock on wood, haven't had a lot of issues. So I work with a lot of direct to consumer brands, CPG brands, and a lot of tech startups as well.
Very cool. Yeah, I think when it comes to HR, it's kind of this black box for a lot of people, because when you come from corporate, you're given all those toolkits. We've talked about this before, where I had managed a team of 9 people and I was a manager and I was an executive. But like starting my own business, I was like, I don't know what the hell I'm supposed to be doing here, because I was given, here are your interview questions. Here is how we hire. Here is your budget. Like, I didn't have to make any of those decisions. And I definitely didn't have to monitor compliance with all those state rules and anything like that. So I think the transition into, running your own business for startups is like, it's a huge jump from the level of responsibility you once had, even if you worked in corporate and you've been exposed to this stuff before.
It really is. I always say it seems scarier than it really is, but it's you don't know what you don't know, right? Because you had people within your company that you worked for taking care of the stuff that you didn't need to know about. And now that you're running it all on your own, there are things that you really need to be aware of. They're not actually that difficult, but they're important that you know about. And just not having somebody in your company that knows those things, you can make so many accidental mistakes.
Very true. And, it's high stakes in terms of people, right? Because now when it was just yourself, it's like the most suffering you can do is busting your own ass, right? You're like, okay, well, I'm working really hard and I'm doing this and I suffer. If I can't make quote unquote payroll, that's a conscious decision I make, right? But now you've got these other humans you have to take care of. And that's a little scary. It's like when I adopted a puppy, not that this is the same thing, but it's kind of like, oh my God, I must care for another life form that is here. And they entrusted me. When I got my first hire, I was like, oh my gosh, someone like trusts me with their career. This is insane. Like to think about in that perspective.
For sure. For sure. Not everybody thinks that way. So I love that you do, but it is a lot of responsibility. Not only that, but your business, like survival, also becomes at stake. So even if you don't necessarily think about it of like, oh, I have this wonderful responsibility of like providing a job for somebody, like it's also, you need to think about it because if you don't hire well or the right people or the right jobs, like it really can tank your business.
Yeah. And that's why I'm so happy there are so many resources out there like you and your podcast. Remind me, World's Greatest Boss, right?
Yes. Yep.
So that's Jackie's podcast. You guys should go take a listen because she does so many great tips. I mean, think of it as like keep what you earn for HR. It's the same type of advice of like how to avoid mistakes, the things that people struggle with, whatever we're hearing from our clients, we tend to relay back over to you guys in the podcast. So Jackie does the same thing. Take a listen if you haven't heard of it. But also, you make a good point too, where like bad hiring decisions really could make or break your business. So what I want to talk about today is how to do a better job of hiring that right person at the right level. Because we were talking about this before, and this is why we wanted to jump on the podcast, that I've struggled with this a lot. And I don't think I'll ever stop struggling with it really to some degree. But it's whether to hire that person who you can build into the person you really want and you can coach up, or if you just have to hire what I call batteries included, you got to hire with somebody who's already done it, already been there, knows more than you do, top talent, which of course comes at a higher price point. Like the age old question, do I have to buy talent or build talent? What are your initial thoughts on that, Jackie, in terms of what advice you'd give?
Totally. Well, I think the reality is that hiring will always be one of the hardest parts of your business. And so I think initially off the bat, like getting rid of the notion that other people have it all figured out or someday you're going to arrive and never make bad hiring decisions, like that's just not true. What I see happen a lot is, especially small business owners who also haven't hired, they are just so gun shy to make any decision at all because they're afraid of it being the wrong decision. And the reality is it's always going to be a gamble a little bit. Like there's no perfect answer. Like there's no perfect process. But in regards to your question about build versus buy, there's a lot of things that you need to think about. And I think just even understanding the difference between the two is really important because I don't think there's a lot of, hiring managers or business owners out there that actually think about it. But if you're hiring somebody, you want to think about a few things. One, is the job that you're hiring for something that you know anything about? Because for you to build talent and for you to hire a more junior level person and pay a little bit less, you're going to have to teach them skills and mold them a little bit and give them the tools and the trainings they need to become an expert in whatever you need them to do. And there's a lot of benefits to that. But one of the most important things is like, do you know anything at all about that topic that you can actually support them? Because if you're going to do that, you have to be able to provide some level of coaching, mentoring, training, and support. The second piece, and obviously there's so many like pros and cons I can dig into about both, but I think one other misconception that I think is out there for buying talent, it's like you think just because somebody worked at this company or with this personal brand or was a part of a company during this time, you see this all the time on LinkedIn, people say like ex Google, ex YouTube. That doesn't mean that they're sorry, I know I can swear on here, that they're good at their job.
Right, right. Or that they'll succeed with you.
or that they'll succeed with you. So it's like you got to be really clear on what expertise you want them to have. And it needs to be more than a college they went to or a company they worked for or an influencer they worked for. And I keep bringing that up because I work with a lot of folks and you and I also are friends. So, like in our peer groups, there's people who are like, oh, I want to hire somebody who helps scale this person's personal brand. And it's like the person that they hired who helped scale that brand didn't have the experience when that person hired them. They were built, right? And so it's like, I think too often you forget that most of the time, if you're hiring a unicorn, that person has been built, not bought. So I feel like I'm going off on a little bit of a few tangents, but those are my initial thoughts on this topic.
Yeah, I think you make a good point there. I think that a lot of people gravitate to, well, especially in the early stages, they immediately have the sticker shock of what talent costs. And they go, oh, I can't afford to hire that person. First of all, there's a mental block on, I can't afford to hire that top talent. So I must therefore go the A, maybe contractor, B, maybe I need to go to a super junior level person that's cheap just to get this off my plate and get the tactical stuff handled. Which, like, you're not wrong for thinking that, but what I'm hearing underneath all that, Jackie, is like you have to align your expectations with what you hired. Because if you are hiring someone junior, even if it's something you haven't been exposed to before, like, for example, my profession, right? This is quintessential hiring an accountant or hiring a finance person. Is like most founders are not well versed in finance. So I say, well, your first hire needs to be somebody experienced enough to just take it off your plate versus somebody who's going to be a junior accounting clerk who's going to ask you questions. You have to be ready for that and knowing, are they going to take ownership of the task or are they going to just be looking for you for all the instructions? And I mean, that can drive somebody a little nuts when it's just like, hey, I hired you to know this. Like, why don't you know this? 'Cause I have 1.5 years of experience.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, I think the other piece to that, what I see a lot because I have a recruiting firm, is people hire me to help recruit for their businesses. They give me a salary range, and the arguments that I have to get into about the type of person they're going to get for that low of a salary range sometimes is insane. The flip side is also true, right? It's like if you only have a certain budget, like let's really get clear on what you can hire then for instead of going out to hire somebody with all of these requirements and they have to have done this, but only be willing to pay a really low amount and think, well, they should just be excited to come work for me. Like you also have to align that. And so that's what a lot of conversations end up being with our clients too, is level setting on, hey, for this salary range, these are the types of people that you're going to be able to hire. And I think also part of it is like getting clear on what are the core traits and expertise that the person needs to have. And then being able during the interview process to effectively assess those things and then weigh them against one another and be like, okay, this person is really skilled in this, but is a little bit more junior in this area. Like, is that okay? Right. And so getting clear on what that looks like too, and knowing that especially in a small business, you're asking people to do a lot of different things. And a lot of times in a small business, the job you're hiring is actually a job that is 3 people in most other bigger companies. And so being able to figure out like where you can give, where you can take when you're hiring for sure, I think is also a component to it.
Yeah, there's so much at play there. And that's why it's so complicated to make this decision. And most people don't even make this consciously, right? Like you said, they have a certain budget, but they have this whole classic champagne taste on a beer budget, right? Where they're going, oh, I want this person to do this. Also, my budget is X. And it's also the classic customer story, right? Of all of our businesses where clients expect the world for very little. And you have to put yourself in also the employee's shoes. Like, what's going to compel somebody to apply and work for you? It's going to involve compensation. You're going to want to attract top talent with the right compensation. And I've made both mistakes. Number one, I have underhired on skill set, thinking, oh, well, I got this person at the entry level. Like, I'm going to go invest in this person at ground floor because I know they have a ton of potential. And then I've also made the mistake of I'm like kind of like make above market pricing on this person, thinking they will elevate because I'm paying them more. And both were wrong, very wrong. Uh, but I had to do those things to figure out the end boundaries of like what I should be doing. And the thing is that sometimes you just have to make these mistakes, honestly, because you think you're okay at hiring and then you realize, ooh, I did not evaluate for that. Now that's an important value I found. You have to figure this out as you go a little bit through trial and error. I feel like nobody is going to be a master hirer out the gate.
Well, you're also dealing with people, right? So it's like in both of those scenarios, your decision might have been the right decision, right? But the wrong person. So, like, what I also see is founders will be like, well, I've hired so many people and paid them so much money and they never can do anything. Like, it never works out. I don't believe that, paying more gets you a better person. And it's like, well, that's because you thought that just paying more meant that you didn't have to have accountability systems in place. You didn't have to be a boss, right? And I'm not saying you did that in this scenario, but I've seen it happen a lot where leaders think, oh, if I pay more, that means I can just be completely hands off. And that's also not true. And so maybe I'll go through some of like the benefits and potential drawbacks and like when it might be the right decision, because also you're dealing with a person. So like, I just like don't want people to shy away from thinking about this and being like, oh, I'm never paying high salaries to somebody because every time I've done it, it hasn't worked out. Like, I don't think that will always be true for you. And so, some of the benefits of buying talent is a lot of times they can have an impact faster, right? Because they already know some of the skills or they're coming to your business having already done the thing other places. So oftentimes they can hit the ground running a little bit faster. Again, that doesn't mean they will just come in and within a week, your entire life will be changed. Like, I think there's still a 60-day learning period, right? Where they're learning your business, they need time, all of that stuff.
That's expensive because basically you have to be ready to pay for about 2 months and hold back on resentment because like you got to be willing to invest in this person for say 2 months at least to learn the ropes before they're going to start generating that ROI back to you. It's a delayed sort of ROI when it comes to people. Like they're not just going to come out the gate. That is so important to understand. And I think conceptually I understood that. But it does hurt a little bit when you're paying that paycheck every week or every couple weeks and you're like, okay, when am I going to start seeing the payback for this? Like, I'm looking forward to this. I really hope I didn't make a mistake here. Right. So you don't know if it's a good decision for several months. And that's really nerve wracking sometimes.
Yeah, 100%. It is. In the long term, another benefit is they're likely going to be more independent, but that also comes with how your management style is, right? It's like you need to set up an environment where that person does have a little bit of autonomy and the ability to execute while also having the ability to ask questions to understand really like the overall strategy of the business so that they can be more independent. So I think it's also like there's a this and, right? And that benefit. Another great thing that I think often is underlooked is they can bring like fresh perspectives because they've worked at other companies and in other industries to your business. And just having somebody who maybe knows a little more about something than you can help build your confidence a little bit too. So I think that's important to mention. So those are really some of the benefits. I'm sure there's more, but those are the ones I think that are really top of mind. The drawbacks, they're typically more expensive. We've already talked about that. They are also sometimes harder to mold into like your system or your culture because they have their set ways of doing things. And so being able to also assess their adaptability throughout the interview process, I think is really important because people will come with bad habits.
Yeah. Yeah. Or assumptions.
Exactly.
That's a big thing, actually. And I've noticed this in my industry, right? Is people come in with a lot of corporate background. So if I hire a CFO on my team, for example, they're going to come in with like 10 plus years of experience working in corporate. And I have to work my ass off at unbrainwashing them. I have to go, like, that's not what we do here. Put that down. Like, it's okay. But there's a lot of bad habits, right? And a lot of assumptions and a lot of what I would call like just those tendencies that maybe don't align to your culture, which is why it's so important to your earlier point about like looking for a values and culture fit and those traits that you're looking for in the person over simply the experience. Just because they've had these X years of experience at this company doesn't mean that they're going to be culturally aligned with your mission, your goals, and that they'll be marching to the same drum as you.
Totally. Totally. Yeah, you already mentioned this, but I do think what I see a lot in my recruiting business is because I work with a lot of startups, oftentimes, they'll need to hire like their first ever director of sales
Mm.
or something like that. And they really want someone with quite a bit of experience. And oftentimes that is somebody who's worked at like a bigger corporation, and they can really struggle with the pace of working within a small business or the lack of resources that you have at a startup, right?
Mhm.
Like when you're at a big company, you have all of this data, you have all these reports, you have all these other people that get you stuff that you need. But when you are in a small business or a startup, you're scrappy and you're the one who's figuring stuff out. And so that can often be very challenging. And honestly, I would say that's the hardest part to assess in an interview process. That's where the biggest gamble is, in my opinion.
100%. I agree with that based on experience because in theory, it sounds great. It's also hard because in an interview setting, you're also kind of like selling the job, they're selling themselves. Everybody wants this to work out. It's like a date, right? Where you're like, I'm hoping we're not wasting our mutual time here. And you are kind of hoping it works out. And then what you're thinking is like, if I say, hey, this is going to be very fast paced, you need to be adaptable and you need to be scrappy, like it excites people when you talk about it.
Yeah.
And then they get in and they're like, "Oh, okay, like, where's your whatever system?" It's like, "That's a good one." Like, "Who's in charge of this?" Well, technically you. And you realize that there's a lot more ownership that's expected of these people than what they're used to. So even though they have these prestigious titles, and not to generalize this, but I feel like a lot of certain executives or certain people in these higher management positions who come from corporations, they got by working way less than 40 hours a week of actual work. They got by kind of moving their mouse around sometimes, being a little bit more autonomous, right? So they may not have had the direct accountability and ownership that is expected of a small business.
100%. I do want to talk a little bit about some of the benefits and drawbacks of building talent. I actually think, especially if you are a new leader and you've never really hired into your business or had employees before, it's actually better for you to be building talent first, because that is really where you learn how to be a boss and you learn how to set up the systems needed to employ people more because you have to, right? And so I think until you've done that, I don't think you should be going out and hiring a bunch of experienced talent, because they still need the infrastructure set up like to operate within your business. And where you're going to set that up is by building and developing talent.
But also, you're working with pencil, not pen, a lot of the times in your early stage, as I put it. So your processes are constantly changing and they have to be nimble. And that's very expensive. Let's say you're buying talent in, you're buying a leader, like early stage. You're going to change your whole process. You're going to switch CRMs. You're going to switch platforms. You're going to add a platform you didn't previously have. Like that's something that a lot of them can't handle because it's like, okay, I would just rather be slotted into like leading a process here, like rather than entering in data, right? Or doing some of those like medial tasks, so to say.
To add to that, a lot of the folks who are considered more experienced, who maybe like worked their way up at a brand you admire, they're not interested in going in back usually. Sometimes they are. Like I'm a psycho that loves to continue to go back and build. But a lot of times, once you've been through that build phase, you don't have interest in going back and being a generalist again. And so that's also something that I see, with some of my other types of clients. They'll want to hire somebody who like worked for Amy Porterfield or somebody like that who helped scale during like their biggest level of scale. And it's like somebody who's been with that person from the beginning is now in a higher level job that they're not going to want to come back to you when you're at that build phase and do it again.
Right, right.
Like they don't want to do it.
Why would you want to start the video game again at level 1
Right.
when you've gained the skills to get you to level 13?
100%.
So it's difficult, right? Like they've done it before, but I'd say who's their protege or get them to help you hire the person.
Exactly. And I always say, okay, go look at what that person's background was when they started there and go hire that person. And guess what? It looks like nothing like what you're looking for right now.
Exactly. And it's so difficult, but like not knocking business owners for trying to do this, right? Because that's what they see.
That's what they hear from stage.
Exactly, that they need to hire these people. But you have to be listening to people who are at your stage and that are maybe one step ahead of you and not 10, and who they hired last year, you know, not who they hired 8 years ago and now is crushing it for them. Like they made a good investment, right? But the question you should be asking is not how do I get that person? It's how do I make the same investment now? Right. So the building the talent piece, we talked about buying talent. I think we know kind of the pros and cons. Building talent, though, I feel like it's a little bit more complicated because it's a lot more on you. You know, you can't quote unquote write the check and get this talent in the door. I feel like that it's even more important if you're going to be investing in building talent that you find that right person for you based on what you're looking for. Also, you have to find someone who will grow with you because that's the hard part. I always hear this phrase like, what got you here won't get you there. So when you're building talent, you have to kind of almost evaluate for that adaptability to your point, right?
Yeah. And I think, Shannon, because you're such a great boss, you truly are. I think you're missing a really foundational component in jumping ahead. And I think so many business owners first think about what they need to look for and who they need to hire instead of who they are. And so I think like you really need to find a way to enjoy mentoring and coaching. You need to be willing to really take a hard look at yourself as a boss and set up an environment where people can learn. And you've set up workflows that like helps with training. Because I went to this digital marketing event a month ago and I sat in on this topic of like implementing AI into your business, which I promise there's a tie in here. She has a business that really looks at utilizing AI to streamline internal business processes, right? And she said, the first thing you need to do is sit down and write a playbook for what you want it to do, like you are training an intern. It was such great advice, obviously, for that, because then you can like tell AI what you want it to do. But I think that's what you should do every time you're hiring. And especially if you are hiring to build talent, you need to be able to explain the job that you need them to do as if you were hiring an intern who knows nothing. And I think too often leaders like skip that piece, or they'll say, I don't like managing people, so I'm going to hire an experienced person, but you're just spending more money. It's a lot more risky, right? So I think like the first thing is taking a step back and realizing that you have to be a mentor and a coach, whether or not you like it or not.
And you have to do it either way, buying or building. But I think the building, you are relied upon greatly in that role. And that's going to be the driver of the success of that person. I think too many people blame like the talent when at a certain point it's like, well, what are you doing to foster that?
Yeah, like almost all people problems are workflow problems, almost always. And a few other things, but I would say that. So I think the first step is like taking a step back and being like, okay, like I need to step it up as a boss and I need to figure out how to do this. And setting up really strong systems for training and giving feedback and all of that. So I think that is super critical. And then assuming you've done that, you're right. Like it takes a lot more intention. But some of the benefits are, I say it's more cost effective up front because at the end of the day, you're paying for it, right? So it's like, yes, the payroll check you're cutting every other week is less, but there is an investment in your time, your energy. You're paying to like send them to training. Like there are other costs that I think people do forget about, but that payroll check is definitely lower.
Right.
It's easier often to shape habits or like ways of working or culture. Um, it definitely can often create higher retention, lower turnover. Like people are a lot more loyal to you. It can help you in scaling your team faster because like once you set up this process for one person, you kind of have it for future ones.
Hey, did you know that you can actually see my face and watch this episode on YouTube? If you're not already subscribed to our YouTube channel, make sure you head over there and you subscribe and check out all of the guest episodes along with some of my solos. We're posting every single week on YouTube. See you there. And you have them to train on it. Like they can help craft it the way they do it. And then you can relay that to other people. And that way they can help you build it. But one thing I did do, like when I first hired certain people, was I was fully transparent with the fact that you will be building this process alongside of me. We have everything kind of sketched out, like a wireframe of it, but like we want to make it yours. And we want you to fill in the blanks and build the processes with us. So if you're somebody who wants to do that and you want to build it the way that works for you, but that means we're building, I think that's a really key thing you have to be honest about with the expectation.
Yeah, totally. Being honest and real with yourself and with them is super important because that's the other piece. Like, you don't have to have it all figured out in order to hire them, but at least the self-awareness piece, I feel like, is what's missing a lot. And also the willingness to want to change your ways of being too and your work styles. Like, I think there's oftentimes bosses who are like, well, this is the way I do it. I don't want to change anything. And it's like, well, if you're hiring people onto your team, you have to be willing to make changes in workflows and stuff like that.
Yeah, like when I hired my controllers who work with me, right? They work on clients, so they have a lot of bookkeeping background, right? In the interviews, I said, I want to be the dumbest QuickBook user in my company. Like that's my goal is I want to be the dumbest QuickBooks user in my company. What is a feature of QuickBooks that you think I don't know? Like what is a function of the tool that most people don't know that you know about? And that's now what I'm asking because it's like would love to be the dumbest person in the room when it comes to a lot of technical things. I said, I want to hire someone who can take it and run with it. And I don't want to be the oracle. Like, I don't want to be the person that everyone goes to. I said, I don't want to be the subject matter expert on literally everything. I want to be the subject matter expert on how Keep What You Earn does XYZ. Like, what is the tone? What is the vision? What is the goal here? And then the rest of you can decide the how. Like, you guys are the bosses of the how. I'm the boss of the why. And that's all that it comes down to. And that's actually how we phrase it was like the how we do it. Like, I can give you the way I would do it, but I'm a novice. Like my Excel extends to VLOOKUPs. So I'm like, okay, this is how I would do it, but I know this is not the easiest way. Like I know that's not the best way. So I expect you to help me find the best way and go execute, right? I don't care what route we take. I just want to get to the destination within obviously legal and compliant grounds. But that's the key message I always send is like, look, you're the how expert. I'm going to give you a plan B, but I need someone who's going to, drive that forward.
Yeah. Well, and that's also really clear on the seat you want on the bus, right? And the role you want to play in your business, which comes over time as you hire people.
Yeah, but I think that honesty we talked about is really key. Like, I was really scared, as I'm sure you are listening. I was really scared to admit, like, we don't have systems, we don't have a process, we don't have a workflow for this. This is the first time we're hiring this person. I just kind of like put it all out there and said, someone who is ready to work with a semi-blank slate and build a process that they know works alongside the founder and be part of that. There are people who crave that. There really are. And you have to be honest about the expectation so that they're going to be happy if you're super clear about this is what you're going to be facing in your first 6 months. It's abundantly clear at that point, like that we're looking to build and we want you to be part of it. But you're going to be building it in a way that works for you. So the advantage of building talent in that regard is that you can craft it with them in mind. Like the process you're building is with them in mind. And by that, I mean, not just building talent, building process. But when you say building up talent, let's talk about for a second, building up talent in an existing role. So like you're looking for somebody to come in who, is taking over maybe a junior role or taking it on for the first time even. And you know that, okay, they don't come in with a ton of experience. I'm going to have to mentor and coach. I want to go back to your point where you brought this up. Mentoring and coaching and the role that plays, like, especially if somebody hasn't had that role before or hasn't been a boss before, like where do they start in terms of resources or what does that actually look like in terms of learning these types of skills? Even if they have the desire to be a great mentor or coach, they may not really know what that means or looks like.
Yeah. Oh, there's a lot of resources, but I think the first is read books on management and listen to podcasts on it because most entrepreneurs are really good at the personal development side of things because, like, let's be honest, being an entrepreneur is just a personal development journey, but you don't learn tactical manager skills in that. And so I think like really investing time to learn from people and read books. I mean, my podcast offers different solutions for that. So World's Greatest Boss plug. You'll get a bunch of like compliance, but also tactical advice on how to manage people. Um, and then I think just starting to implement some of those things that you learn and testing and realizing that it's a practice that you have to test and try and you'll learn it over time is where I would start. I know that's not like a super tactical answer, but you have to invest the time and energy into learning it because it doesn't just happen.
Along with that, because that's kind of in the, not say in the abstract, but like you can read management books, right? But in terms of relating to them and everything, what I did, and I don't have everything figured out, but what I did was I really thought about my past experience in the employee seat. Like what made me quit jobs? What made me join companies? And what drove me crazy about bosses? Like if I made a gripes list, if I could give a Yelp review on past bosses, what would I say? What words would come up for me? And I really thought about that, about the micromanagement or about the lack of trust or about the self-interest and the lack of why and the expectations that were unrealistic. And I thought, okay, maybe I overcorrected for this. But the classic millennial manager that's like, oh, I went through this and I'm going to do the polar opposite. But in a way, I just absorbed my own feedback and my own lived experience and those around me. And I said, okay, I'm going to learn vicariously through what I've seen work or not work and say, what would I have done differently? And just kind of piece together my own core beliefs as a boss around how would I handle the situation or how would my former boss handle this situation? And like, let's not do that.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah, because we all have a bit of lived experience with this that we can call on. And I think although we maybe try to suppress it sometimes when we leave and become entrepreneurs, I think there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of value in that. And I think also just developing the skill of having honest conversations with people can really be, I feel like, the biggest hack. And realizing that you don't have to pretend like you have all the answers or it all together for sure.
Yeah, it's really important to admit that out the gate. It's good that, like, I don't expect you to have all the answers, candidate. I also don't have all the answers either. And we both got to be okay with that. Like, that we're all just kind of making this up as we go and we're just doing our best. And I think that the more you can have those transparent conversations, the more safe your employees will feel coming to you and being honest. But also, going back to the sort of like debate between buying and building, I feel like there's no core right or wrong answer for these. But if you could characterize, Jackie, kind of like to tie this with a bow in a sense, like characterize typical roles or typical types of hires. Like if I gave you a card on one of those like talk shows and you had like a flipping, the stick with the card with two sides that's like buy or build. Are there any characteristics of like I would typically build talent if you're looking for XYZ and I would typically buy talent if you're trying to do XYZ?
Well, I think it depends on the business and what your expertise is as a CEO or a leader. And I think you should have a mixture of both in your business. I don't know that you want to just have one or the other, but I would say there's certain departments I think that lean more towards having generalist jobs. And so I think if you're hiring more of a generalist job, that is an easier one to build talent with. And so I think marketing usually is that type of a role. An operations role oftentimes is even sales. I have a slight hesitation because it's like, depends on how quickly you need them making sales, but I think that sometimes can. I think there's roles that do require expertise, right? Legal, finance, accounting, like HR, oftentimes does require a certain amount of expertise so that your business doesn't run into trouble. Yeah, so that is how I would answer the question because it's harder to be like, oh, for sure, every time you hire a social media person, it's better to build. But I think like thinking about it more like, okay, is a generalist better for this role or do I really need a specialist? And if it is a specialist job, then that is probably one where you're going to buy versus build.
Yeah. And, like I said, employee versus contractor is also on the table, right? Can you hire fractional help? Wink, wink, right? It's like, can you bring someone in who maybe isn't going to break the bank for you, but bring that expertise? And that's what you have to evaluate, though, I think, is your willingness to act as the coach, mentor, and supervisor of this person and oversee and how much ownership they're planning on taking. I also look at like the size of the business and their maturity, not size in terms of just employee count or revenue, but I call it business maturity. Like, are they a developed organization with clear expectations where we have to slot somebody in who's going to be accountable to the revenue targets, right? And have that accountability on goals we've already set in place. It's really looking at the characteristics of if you're hiring for results. I feel like if you're willing to pay for the immediate results in a sense on a process you already have established versus paying to create it or paying to build up the process or build up the organization, it's going to be hard for someone to slot in without that foundation.
100%. And I just want to go back, and I know that nobody wants to hear this, but like, you just got to try and you learn along the way. And yes, like we hammer home that hiring is very costly, but if you have the right systems and tools to at least catch poor performance fairly quickly and you have the right process to address it, it's not as expensive. And that's a whole nother topic. But I think like the wrong hiring decision usually ends up costing the most when you are not really good at firing fast and in a good way. And so I just say that in that, like, sometimes you just got to take a gamble and try. And if it's the wrong hire, you can course correct and then learn and make a better hire next time. But especially on this topic, sometimes you just got to make a decision and see how it shakes out.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to be overly pessimistic about this, but more like hedging to say yes. And one thing that we've implemented, because I've made these mistakes before, yes, but also we've implemented is this sort of we do check-ins with people. We take the job description and we make sure our job description is like to the T, like traits that are deal breakers and descriptions of the day-to-day activities and the items that are under ownership of this role, like straight ownership versus I help with this versus I own this, right? And we go through all of this in grave detail. And it's like, why is your job description so detailed? Like, I'll tell you why. Because 30 days later, 60 days later, and 90 days later, we pull that job description up, and that is the entire 30, 60, 90. Is we go through and say, is there anything on this list that you're not currently doing? Is there anything you're doing that isn't on this list that we've somehow added to your plate that we need to either add to this appropriately? And also, it's just kind of a level set on, do you feel like you're compensated fairly for these expectations? And this eliminates so much like passive aggressive or like miscommunications or anything. If somebody feels a little resentful, like, oh, well, Shannon's expecting a lot out of me and like we didn't talk about this and I thought this was my job and blah, blah. It's like, no, let's just bring it back to this is kind of the initial contract. When you responded to this job post and said, I am interested, this is what it said. And we don't do that enough, I think, as entrepreneurs. We don't bring it back to the job posting that was the initial ad, the initial promise, in a sense.
I mean, no, because nobody spends time actually crafting that. Oh, I need a social media person, create a job posting. And then they post that to quickly get applicants to see who's available. And then they make the job based on who's available, not what they need.
Yeah, we got to do another episode on the attraction and repel marketing of a job description.
Yes, yes. But yes, you're right. Like, and I love that you do that because you are setting yourself up from the beginning to not make as costly of a hiring mistake. If you end up realizing you made a mistake, it's not going to be as costly because you have the process for assessing whether or not they're doing the job based on what you hired for. And so that is how you're hedging against it. And I think that is super smart.
Yeah, but we have to have those conversations 30, 60, 90. No matter if I built or bought talent, right? I have to have those conversations and say, are we living up to the expectations you had of us? And are you living up to the expectations we had of you? And if there is any incongruency there, we address it right then and there to course correct it forward. But it also makes it super clear. And this is why I brought it up, because you just mentioned like firing fast. And what drives me crazy is when people fire fast because they're impatient. or they fire fast because they're using a different measuring stick. And they're firing because the person isn't a mind reader, And it's kind of like, wait, hold on a second. Is it the person? Or is it like their expectations weren't super clear? Like, is it the wrong person or the wrong process? And I'm willing to admit, like, I kind of assume everything's my fault, which might be a flaw, but I assume everything's my fault. And I'm going, what can I be doing better to communicate these expectations so that it is like unreasonable to assume it's an us problem if the person isn't performing? That is what goes through my head, is how can I make it unreasonable that if there's an incongruency here, like unreasonable, they wouldn't understand the expectations. Unreasonable, they wouldn't know exactly what I expect. And if they still can't perform on that, then my decision, it becomes a lot clearer and less mucky and more confident. But I think that people have to invest in that process.
And that's why you're a great boss.
Thank you, Jackie. But also, to be fair, that came with lots of scars. I've learned this from doing, so take my advice. If you're just hiring even the first time or even the 11th time, these are ways you can hedge against it. Jackie is such an expert in this, and you've helped me. Gosh, Jackie's resources are so good, you guys, that she helped me craft like my first job descriptions and taught me how to think this way. So I couldn't be more grateful to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's fun.
So not only do you have the podcast, which is amazing, World's Greatest Boss, check her out. We have some resources too that you guys share. So talk to me about that if our listeners want to dig deeper into their hiring process.
Absolutely. So one of the best resources is actually on my website. If you head over to peopleprinciples.co, right on like the main homepage, you're going to see the HR and Hiring Essentials playbook. It's basically the most important, like foundational things you should have in place in your business that I wish I had when I joined startups. And it's all for free with some templates and all of that stuff. So I think that is the best place to start. And there is an entire module in there about hiring, including like a free interview training. There's a ton of free resources there. So I think that alone will help with so many of the things that we just discussed. And so that again is at peopleprinciples.co. You'll see it right on the homepage.
Amazing. We'll include all those links in the show notes, guys. So just click down below and you can check them out. Jackie, as always, thank you for coming on the show. We'll have you back again, I'm sure. And check out her podcast as well. We also collaborate on there too. So, all good resources. As you think about growing and scaling your business, it's important to focus on how your operating costs align with your profit and personal goals. Are you allocating your resources wisely? Are your expenses supporting growth, or are they holding you back? Building a sustainable and profitable business takes intentional budgeting and regular assessments of where your money's actually going. Now, with a power session, you can get personalized strategies to help your businesses thrive. Check out the show notes for more information on power sessions and how we can work with you to create the profit plan your business needs for a successful 2025.